you. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We would like to thank you, Essential Energy, for your disclosure and congratulate you on your commitment to the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives. As you know, we have Cassandra Goldie from ACOS on the panel and Andrew Richards from the EUAA. Just by way of brief introduction, we've said that it is regrettable that in 2021 we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including on energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas, and the upsurge in housing pressures and other financial pressures for people around the country. So as a result, we consider that the themes of this year's report are likely to be fairly similar to last year's themes: affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050, or preferably a lot sooner, but with the consequent key issue that no customer should be left behind in that transition, particularly because of affordability issues. And these themes have generally been endorsed by the stakeholder forums that we've already held this year. So that's what we'd like to discuss with you and the other CEOs of signatory organisations to get your perspective on 2021. So we have some questions for you and some areas for discussion, but just in starting, I'd like to hand it over to you, John, for your comments and anything you'd like to highlight from your disclosure for this year.
Oh, thank you, Claire. Good morning, and very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hi, Cassandra, and hi, Andrew. Obviously, I'm joined by Luke Jenner, our Chief Operating Officer this morning, and also Belinda Kalmia, our Head of Customer Experience. Claire, I'd just like to add to your acknowledgement of traditional owners. All three of us are actually speaking to you this morning from the lands of the Biripi people, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. We very much appreciate the opportunity to meet with the Independent Accountability Panel this morning and acknowledge the ongoing efforts of all involved in the Energy Charter. And we're pleased also to be able to respond to any questions you may have on Essential Energy's third annual Energy Charter disclosure statement. We at Essential Energy are proud of our ongoing commitment to customers, particularly in ensuring business delivery during challenging environments that we've experienced over the last 12 months. We believe we've formed stronger ties with customers through this period, particularly through a range of flood support initiatives. And obviously, Port Macquarie in particular was very seriously impacted by floods. We did so working in collaboration with accredited service providers, other emergency service providers, and all levels of government. And in collaboration with an international team, we developed maps indicating flood areas to support crew safety, both in our restoration and the efforts of Disaster Relief Australia. And Luke can certainly talk to that in more detail if required. It's an important initiative. Claire, acknowledge your comments on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and obviously we have worked very closely with a range of stakeholders throughout that period and are very proud of our response. The other thing I would note in opening is the recent review of our corporate strategy, and that's recently been approved by the Essential Energy Board. And our revised corporate strategy really fully acknowledges three things: the enormity of the transition underway in the energy sector, the central, critical and expanding role of the customer, and finally, the absolute criticality of efficient distribution networks in the current and emerging energy landscape. I referenced COVID-19 a moment ago, and we're very proud of our protocols and working arrangements throughout that period and the extent to which we've been able to maintain reliable electricity supply for customers and keep our employees and members of the public safe throughout the period. We're also very proud of the fact we've been able to increase capability within our customer contact and customer contact centre, and customer resolution teams, particularly in the identification and provision of support to customers in vulnerable circumstances. It's fair to say we are continuously learning and improving through natural disasters. And obviously we've had probably more than our fair share over the last couple of years. And we're using insights from this to accelerate and expand alternate technology development. And I'd reference two particular examples. Firstly, standalone power systems, which were implemented in sort of emergency circumstances through the bushfire period. And some of those remain in place, and we're doing ongoing work and trials to further examine and roll out standalone power systems where it makes sense, but particularly as an emergency response initiative. And we're also working very hard to increase the penetration of composite poles across our network. So we currently use and have traditionally used natural round and plantation timber poles. We're now moving much more to composite poles, and roughly 20% of poles being inserted today are composite poles. And obviously they have particular benefits in bushfire prone areas and in bushfires in providing a much higher level of resilience against bushfires. We've also worked directly with customers and stakeholders on the co-design of a number of innovative tariffs, which are now in trial. And this is really aimed at improving fairness and ensuring our network delivers products and services that customers expect. And this is particularly relevant given the rapidly increasing penetration of household solar generation, which is now in excess of 25% across our network, and the emerging penetration or the emergence of electric vehicles en masse. On a less positive note, I guess, the major natural disaster events we've experienced and also new license compliance conditions have given rise to costs which were not contemplated in the 2019 to 24 revenue determination. And so we are currently working on cost pass-through applications, and there have been a number of stakeholder round table discussions to get feedback on these and to minimise the impact. Regrettably, the impact of these cost pass-through applications will be to reduce our forecast real reduction in distribution charges in the current regulatory period from 3.8 down to 0.5. On a much more positive note, our whole of business transformation continues apace and is absolutely working to maintain downward pressure on distribution charges, and so charges to customers, and also progressing our customer-centric journey and embedding a holistic customer focus from the sort of the top of the organisation right throughout. That includes enhancing the customer or having an enhanced customer experience as part of our corporate strategy, refining on an ongoing basis our customer segmentation and journey mapping to ensure we fully understand customers and the opportunity to improve individual customer experience. And also a dedicated transformation work stream entirely focused on empowering customers and acknowledging the changing role of customers in the energy landscape. Just coming back to our corporate strategy, and the revision of that, which I will mention again because it is very important and very much focused on ensuring Essential Energy continues to embrace and facilitate new energy solutions and fulfill our role as an economic enabler for regional, rural and remote New South Wales. And if I may, I'll just close by saying that our successful response to natural disasters and COVID, ongoing improvements in customer focus and engagement, and the continuing transformation initiatives focused on providing the services customers require at a sustainable level of cost are a huge and ongoing credit to the wonderful employees of Essential Energy who are spread across regional, rural and remote New South Wales and work tirelessly to achieve superior customer outcomes, irrespective of the challenges they face. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some opening remarks, and we are very happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, John. I might pass to you, Andrew, first up.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, John. John, I want to start by putting a couple of things together, and then that will lead to a couple of questions. So the questions around particularly where you see the changing nature and changing role of the energy industry going forward. So if we look at the huge amount of work that not only you, but your other colleagues in New South Wales did on disaster recovery, whether they be bushfires or floods or famine or locusts, whatever else has been thrown at you.
We've had all of the above.
And mice.
And plagues, yes.
Indeed.
And 2 tornadoes.
Yes.
So you tend to be, and the energy industry tends to be one of the first people on the scene. So if it's a bushfire, the ground's still warm and your guys are going, your people are going through. If it's floods, you're there. And in reading your disclosure and knowing Essential Energy and knowing a lot of the other industry participants as well, they tend to get into situations where they're doing more than just replacing the network. When you have and it's coming through in a number of other disclosures as well, that people are sort of moving into things like helping people to get through domestic violence situations and a whole range of other things, because you are quite at the forefront. And so putting that together with the customer segmentation research that you are doing in that customer journey mapping, it seems like both the depth and breadth of engagement and relationship the energy industry is starting to build with its customers is getting quite significant and will become more significant as technology gets put on people's roofs and all those sorts of things, and you're doing co-design and tariffs. Through putting all that together, are you seeing the energy industry's relationship, both in depth and breadth with its customers, changing? I'm assuming that, so it'd be good to understand what that looks like. And how do you, as an energy business, where do you draw that line as to when have you done all that you can, and where do you need to get others to come in, or where do you hand it over? So it seems to be this evolving thing that the energy industry is becoming a little bit more, or a lot more than the energy industry.
Wow, thanks, Andrew. That's a fairly broad question to respond to. So let me start with some sort of higher level remarks, and Luke can provide some greater colour around some of our specific disaster relief initiatives, which have really aided customers. But you're absolutely right in what you're saying, in as much that the energy industry and its relationship with customers is changing. And I'll state the blindingly obvious here. We're moving from a situation where there was a one-way flow of electrons, and customers at the end of the network had no option as to how they obtained those electrons, and that's clearly changing. And we as an industry need to respond to that, and are responding to that. And in particular, distribution networks, which are irrespective of invoicing and contractual arrangements, are the first point of contact for most customers, and particularly relevant in the rural, regional and remote areas that we cover. And so I think that's sort of the high level here. It's also absolutely right what you say in terms of there is an evolving sort of relationship in in response to natural disasters. And you're absolutely right in saying that we are often, after the RFS or the fire brigade, the first on the ground. And often it's the case that we're not able to restore supply for quite some time. And Luke can, as I say, talk to in a little bit more detail to what we do in those circumstances. In fact, Luke, I might just hand to you at this moment just to talk about both bushfires and floods in terms of.
Absolutely. Look, I think the journey we've been on the last 2 or 3 years, really, if you started, to your point, Andrew, back before the 1920 bushfire season, I think us and a lot of other energy market participants saw ourselves with our very defined roles. And we would have seen our role probably is to put the network back together. During the 19 to 20 bushfires, as everyone knows, that was about a 6-month campaign for Essential Energy, and we had some customers that were out for 8 weeks because, ironically, they got flooded after there was fires and there was bridges had to be rebuilt and all sorts of things. But we really took that opportunity to refocus our role. Of course, we have to rebuild the poles and wires, but we also saw our role as just helping the community generally get back on their feet. And so we put in place during that bushfire season quite a comprehensive customer care package. And we spoke about that last year, so I won't refresh that. But we really learned, and we put that in place halfway roughly through that bushfire season. And we learned from that. And during the Mid-North Coast floods, which occurred in March in Port Macquarie, that customer care package was put in within the first few hours of the disaster unfolding. And we really saw our role, and we do see our role as, because we are generally, in the case of the floods, we're the second responders behind the SES, basically, is really helping those communities get back on their feet, because it is going to take some time to get the power back on. So some tangible examples of things like we delivered fuel to dairy farmers by boat, jerry cans worth of fuel and diesel. We provided generators to people that were going to be without supply for a few days. We worked with community centres to set up charging hubs. We provided, we bought water and shipped it over to literally islanded communities and food. We made sure we provided the information that people needed. And we really extended our role beyond our kind of a regulated role, if I can use that phrase, Andrew. So a really good example would be to the north of Port Macquarie. It's called the North Shore. There's an area where you can only get to by a ferry, and the ferries were literally washed away. Essential Energy was able to get supply back quite quickly, but there were hundreds of houses that had been inundated by water. And as you're probably aware, that's the owner's responsibility to get an ASP to go and check their own installation and re-energise it. But of course, if you're on an island that you can't get to, how are you going to get an ASP there? It's impossible. So what we did is we actually, through our own contract panel of ASPs, we organised ASPs to come in from around the state. We organised the boats to get them over to the North Shore. We set up community forums in the community hall over there to explain to people what was happening. And then the ASP still went and did the work directly for the customers in the normal way, but the whole process was facilitated by Essential Energy so that the customer basically wasn't inconvenienced and wasn't at their wit's end. And to be honest, if you went back 2 or 3 years ago or 5 years ago, they would have contacted the call centre and have said, oh, you need to get an ASP over there. But clearly it was absolutely impractical. So we got a lot of really positive feedback from our customers about that. And that's the sort of thing that we're starting to bring into every one of these natural disasters moving forward. So
that's amazing work. And we've talked about it before. And I think stepping up and going beyond like that, I think is a lot of the industry's done that, and Essential's certainly been part of that. I guess beyond that though, and so that's the disaster recovery, which kind of raises the bar a little bit on expectations, if you like.
Yeah.
Then through the customer segmentation and research and the customer journey mapping, I guess there's two questions. One is, are you seeing sentiment coming through in that indicates that people want you to be doing more beyond for disaster recovery aside? Are they expecting more from you? Are they expecting more from their relationship because I'm putting solar panels on the roof, because I may eventually be driving an electric vehicle, because you talked about the standalone power systems? It seems as though the overall relationship starts to expand. And
yeah, completely agree, Andrew. And I would sort of suggest that that process has really only just begun in terms of the enormity of the change that's coming. And you referenced panels, electric vehicles, standalone power systems, include batteries and other forms of storage in that, and the ongoing emergence of digital technologies and digital tools that will allow customers to be far more nuanced in how they generate, consume, trade, store, whatever the case may be, electrons. And we're seeing that already. And I think each of us on this call are starting to think about that in our own domestic environments as to how we might do things differently going forward. And that's just a sort of an insight into the fact that this is a massive change that's coming, and the industry is and will need to continue to respond to that. And as I said previously, clearly distribution networks have a very, very significant role to play in that. And what we've done in the past is not necessarily, well, almost certainly not going to be what we do in the future. And just to reference it back to disaster recovery for a moment, and just to link that back to the sort of the change in the digital environment, the fact that we now have a digital twin of our network and can, if you like, model the network in real time. Once upon a time, when a part of the network was lost to flood or fire, we would have immediately rebuilt it on a like-for-like basis. We're now far more nuanced in how we do that, in terms of potentially considering standalone power systems, inserting composite poles, which I referenced previously, but also potentially reconfiguring the network to be much better suited to the current environment in terms of the layout of customers and such like, which has real benefits in terms of direct cost, and also in terms of the customer experience. And the other of course overarching critical point here is that we as a distribution business and the industry more broadly need to continue to focus on reducing the end-to-end cost of energy and electricity specifically, because if we're not doing that, then all these other initiatives tend to fall a little flat, and so hence why distribution networks and businesses such as us are spending so much time analysing future network investment, particularly in relation to the emergence of electric vehicles and new loads and critical high loads at discrete points. We're continuing to model that and working very hard to increase our sophistication in that area to ensure that there is not over-investment or unnecessary or inefficient investment, and that we can deliver these services on an ongoing basis at the lowest possible price and with the highest level of efficiency, and in so doing achieve the best possible customer outcomes, but also avoid the substitution risk, which sees connections and load lost from the system, which has an adverse impact on every participant and every consumer.
John, could I just ask you, is what you're talking about the way forward for that whole group of customers that we are concerned about, who are digitally disadvantaged, who live in regional and remote areas, who live in public housing, are renters? How do those people catch up with these massive changes that you're talking about, when they won't be able to afford the electric vehicles and the batteries and all the rest of it? So how do we make sure they aren't they are kept in the whole system going forward.
Claire,
Go for it, Luke.
Claire, I might just answer that if you don't mind. So that's a huge area of concern for us as a business. In fact, we're currently going through our customer engagement as part of our regulatory strategy, and we've been holding customer forums, and the voice of renters is loud and clear about their concerns about not being left behind because they can't install solar panels and they may not have the capital to invest in batteries and other technologies. So one of the things we've already started is working with other energy market participants to trial community batteries, and this could potentially be expanded to community solar, where customers don't necessarily need to put up front the capital to buy a battery or install solar. That's installed somewhere else on the network, and they can for a fee they can access part of that battery or part of that solar array for their own benefit. And certainly that's been tested with some of those customer groups, and there was a lot of very positive feedback from those groups who, to be honest, at the moment do feel like they've totally been left out of a whole sort of part of the energy ecosystem and the energy journey.
Luke,
So that's something we're very focused on.
Can you talk a bit about, in doing that, whether it be a SAPS or community battery or community solar, going forward, there'll need to be a tariff for that. So what are your principles around tariff design for those sorts of things?
So, I mean, the principles for tariff design around a SAPS, for example, Andrew, is that a SAPS customer should pay exactly the same tariff as if they were physically connected to the network. So they should be treated exactly the same as if they were connected to the network. So they get the same fault and emergency response. They should be able to get the same deals that they could get, through retailers. They shouldn't be disadvantaged in any way, because clearly the benefit for the network is less infrastructure costs. And again, testing that with customers, there are a lot of customers that are very comfortable with a SAPS, provided they've got that, I'll say, the backing of Essential Energy to know that if there's a storm and the SAPs go out, they can call on us and we'll be there just the same way as we would be for a connected customer.
They don't want to know how the sausages are made, don't really care, just as long as we're all getting the same sausages.
Want it to work.
Correct. In terms of community batteries and community solar, to be honest, we're still working we're at the early stages of that. We're still working through what tariffs might look like in that regard, and how you would pay for that, et cetera. But the point is, there's benefits for all parties in this. So obviously for Essential Energy, there's benefits, as John mentioned, in maybe not having to invest as much in infrastructure, because community batteries can provide voltage support or consume excess electrons that might be generated. There's benefits from a retailer perspective, because the retailer can arbitrage wholesale electricity costs. And then clearly there's a benefit for the customer, who might have, if they've got their own solar excess electrons, or if they don't have solar, can now access a solar farm that's somewhere adjacent to or in their community with no upfront cost. And then if they want to move houses or they move rental properties, they can still access that deal. So it's a very attractive proposition for a number of parties in the market, not just sort of one beneficiary, if I can put it that way.
If I can just add to that, sorry, Cassandra, add to that very briefly, just to say that this is absolutely a whole of industry challenge. Our distribution charges comprise 36 or 37% of the average retail bill, and so this is a whole of industry challenge. And to your point on tariffs, Andrew, there is really an obligation on the industry at the moment to ensure that tariffs do provide the price signals and the opportunity for all customers, but particularly vulnerable customers, to end up with the lowest possible power bill. And obviously this relates particularly in the current environment to the surplus solar electrons in the market in the middle of the day and the higher prices in the evening. And so it's as broad as better insulation in buildings, and appliances, which can utilize electrons in the middle of the day and you know, provide their service in the evening. So better forms of water heating and cooling and such like. But there really is a need for a whole of industry approach to tariffs and making sure those price signals are right, because then, to Claire's point, renters and those who are disadvantaged can share in the benefits that are flowing to the industry or through the industry and through this revolution more generally. Sorry, Cassandra.
That's probably a good point for me to come in, really, John and Luke. Just want to first of all also thank you for your disclosure, and I particularly, you know, I think the approach that, for example, you're taken to your community advocacy. Greg, can I say it's nice to see the word advocacy in there? It's not, you know, they're bringing stuff to you, John, I hope, and taking it up to you.
They most certainly do.
I figured that's what's going on, and that's a great relationship to have, yeah. And also, for example, the detailed work you've done on customer segmentation. What you've flagged here is that over the next period, you're particularly focusing on what that means for people who are vulnerable. What I want to ask you now is, I think traditionally the term vulnerable has been seen as sort of the people left behind, you know, the much smaller group. It's all about individual behaviours and vulnerabilities. That's not where we see it at this point. I think there is a very large systemic vulnerability that you've started to talk about here, in terms of people who, whatever their behaviours are, they are structurally disadvantaged in the energy market because of the conditions in which they're living, whether they're a renter, what's happening to the adequacy of their incomes. Look, last week it was Anti-Poverty Week. In another life at ACOS, we talked about poverty is not about lack of character, it's about lack of cash, right? And we've got large numbers of customers who are disadvantaged because what we've had, as you know, this is an important announcement from the federal government. This notion that we see is that just reducing the cost of technologies and allowing the market to deliver will not actually deal with the structural disadvantages. So I really see in the sort of Energy Charter framework, this is such an opportunity for leadership. What you just talked about is it's a whole of industry challenge, but what can Essential do as a leader, as a charter signatory, to be a voice on the structural issues that need to be addressed and design solutions to ensure that people who are vulnerable because of their economic conditions are not really disadvantaged over the next period. And it's not a conversation, it's happening now, as you know, right? It's happening right now. People can't afford to get access to the technologies, etc., to reduce the size of their bills. So I just really want you to speak to where you can use your leadership over the next period. You've done the segmentation, you've got excellent intel about design issues, and Luke, you've touched on a few of them. What's the role for you? What's the role for government? Where do we need to really take it up to say we cannot just let the market run this?
So thanks, Cassandra. If I can deal with that sort of from two perspectives, if you like. Yeah. The first is the whole of industry and whole of system costs, because that impacts on every customer, but it disproportionately impacts on low socioeconomic customers, just because of the regressive nature of electricity charging, if you like. And so Essential Energy is very proud of the role that it plays both in the Energy Charter, within Energy Networks Australia, and in the industry more broadly in advocating for efficient outcomes. And by efficient outcomes, I mean the right direction for the industry, as I alluded to earlier, minimizing excess and inefficient investment, and ensuring that all the available technologies and innovations are being utilized and pursued to pursue that objective of lowering overall system cost. And clearly, as I said, we as a distributor comprise roughly 36% of the bill. The biggest variable, of course, is the wholesale price, and we continue to work with governments at all levels to advocate for policies that will positively impact on wholesale electricity prices. And we're intimately involved in the development of regulations for the New South Wales Energy Roadmap, which is clearly very, very much focused on the wholesale price in New South Wales, and that has ramifications outside of New South Wales. We're very much involved in that process and seeking to influence it to the maximum extent possible to achieve the best possible outcomes and mitigate some of the wholesale market risks that are associated with this transition.
Yep, I mean, the regressive nature is because often of the living conditions and their lack of access to technologies. So actually the size of the bill, the usage of the bill, and the source of energy is what plays out in terms of how this disadvantage occurs. So really keen for you to speak to that. You've talked about, for example, design Tariffs, access to community batteries and solar. We've been for far too long now in sort of, we're going to do energy audits. And I know, I don't know whether I felt frustration in your own disclosure where you talk about, during the energy audits, there was a low take up of that, and you're kind of going, what's going on there, right? And so, energy audits will be a part of it, but that's not a systemic solution, is it?
Yeah. We are advocating with government in particular segments. And one example, Cassandra, and also got this loud and clear through the customer forums, is people are frustrated with lack of access to smart meters because it means they only get a bill every 3 months. And then they go, oh, whoops, my bill's $550 and my last one was $350. And that means, I can't buy new shoes for the kids, or I can't go do something, et cetera, et cetera. So, as you know, smart meters are a retailer-led rollout, and we only have 25% of smart meter penetration in our across our footprint. So one of the things we've been advocating with government at the moment, we're advocating around smart meters for life support customers that Essential Energy be able to install them, or dare I use the word, compel retailers to install them, because we see that as a particular customer segment that can benefit greatly from smart meters. And again, coming back to my other point, there are multiple participants in the market, distributors from a life support notification point of view, retailers, and the customer that would all benefit from that. So we are strongly
it's been raised in the customer meetings with us as well. Why don't we just have large scale rollout?
It's absolutely. And some customers, to be honest, say, oh no, New South Wales is next. It was Victoria, but now it's New South Wales. But it's kind of like, well, I hate to break it to you, but it's actually at the current rate, it's a long way away. So we are advocating for those particular customer segments to try and be able to get them more access to those smart meters, because if people can't, and some of these customers are very digital savvy, they have a smartphone, they use Facebook, that's how they want to be communicated with. But obviously they can't get access to their daily or weekly usage data because they don't have the technology to support it.
Yep.
The other point I'd make here, I'll unashamedly plug the Energy Charter here, is that through, and Cassandra, you've alluded to this, but through the COVID period, the definition or the manifestation of vulnerability has changed, or maybe it's just become clearer. But the Energy Charter has provided the opportunity for a much richer conversation between distributors and retailers in particular around how we do address those particular vulnerabilities, and as I say, in light of more granular information, if you like, through the COVID period.
And so, because I mean, a number of people have talked, for example, about the trial on the sort of, no disconnection until you've actually connected personally with consumers. So that's an example of where I'm sure you will see us backing that in as an ongoing approach.
Yeah, so that's not a
Um,
trial for us, Cassandra.
No.
You're probably
No,
aware of that.
no.
That's our BAU.
We were an early
That's
adopter.
it. That's it. Um,
And well done.
Yep. You know, our desire is to see no disconnections, full stop. Really, you know, it's such an essential thing. We should be worried if somebody doesn't have power connected, you know, and really take that very seriously. And I know that you do. But just on the, I suppose knowing that we've got a very particular period here of advocacy, frankly, you know, in terms of what's needed to potentially claw back some of the market approaches that actually are going to compound equity. So I'd just really love you to, if you could, John and Luke, go, of all the things that need to be dealt with over the next 12 months, in terms of what we're seeing happening with technologies and markets and behind closed doors work, the top 3 things we would really love to see dealt with to tackle equity, what would they be?
I'd have, and I'm going to follow on from Luke's point here, I'll have smart meters right at the top of the list.
So would
Yeah.
I. Absolutely.
Because it is, if I can say this, it's an outrage that we're still at 25% on our network, and I believe we're higher than the NEM average outside of Victoria, and so that will make a significant difference. I think the second thing would really be the ongoing development of the relationships and the lines of communication within the industry to ensure that we are exchanging information on a sort of a dynamic basis and becoming far more nuanced in the way we deal with individual customer circumstances. And that's, as I say, that COVID, the coalescence of COVID and the Energy Charter has provided a wonderful opportunity for that. We now need to back it in and continue it to ensure that we are, as I say, being far more nuanced in the way we deal with individual customer circumstances. And I'm going to, apologies for going back to the high level, but I'm going to repeat what I've already said, which is that at the sort of core of all of this is overall system cost and the actual cost of energy. Because if we're not maintaining focus on that, then it disproportionately impacts vulnerable customers, but it impacts the entire economy because employment opportunities are lost in periods of high energy charges or high energy cost, and there is a flow on and a sort of an exponential effect or impact, if you like.
Can I just, on that last one, John, just if I can, it's not pushing back, of course that matters, it does matter, you know, so more power to you to keep on that, you know, on that front, given, you know, who you are in the overall industry. But, you know, we are today in a situation where people on high income, so own their homes, are essentially doing pretty well. Energy pricing, you know, they're generating their own energy, they're, you know, feeding it in, and their bills are going down big time. People on low incomes, it is not the same. And so that's what we see as a really deep inequity that exists right now. And if you were to accelerate changing that, what would it be to fix that?
I'm going to struggle to respond to that, Cassandra, without making deeply political statements, which is probably not.
It's policy. John, it's policy, not politics.
Policy. So
yeah.
addressing how the benefits of innovation in the industry are shared across all customers, rather than the current circumstance where those who can afford, and just use solar panels as a single case in point, but those that can afford solar panels have installed them and benefited quite significantly over time, and not so much today, but in years gone by with high feed-in tariffs. And those who couldn't afford to install them have paid a proportional share on the bill, which has become highly regressive. And so that is a I'll take your lead. That is a significant policy challenge for governments at all level and the industry, and it's something that does need to be addressed, and we should continue to focus on it and use our collective voices to call it out, if you like.
I think
And
it's been called out, John. What's the policy fix you would like to push to see happen on that front?
well,
Highest priority.
I'd certainly be advocating that the current thinking that every energy initiative supported by governments simply gets added to the bill needs to be challenged.
Thank you. Thanks, John. I appreciate it, and Luke as well.
Look, that's
Very, you know, it's really great. I know you've got a lot of voice behind, you know, in terms of your relationship with a particular New South Wales government. It's very important. And so I just, you know, again, really want to thank you for, you know, this, it is complex, but there are some things that are pretty obvious, right?
Indeed.
One
Thanks.
final-
Appreciate the line of questioning.
Can I ask one final complex question?
well, it will have to be final and complex with a very short answer, I'm afraid.
Hopefully, we'll get you in less trouble, John. You talk about the pass-through, and a big part of the pass-through is disaster recovery costs. And we're going through with New South Wales DBs at the moment, the whole price reset, and with Transgrid as well. So this raises the question around, you know, do we pay the recovery costs, or do we pay for increased resilience in the network? And it's becoming a bigger issue. So will high impact, low probability events, will they become high impact, high probability events? And how do we manage that? And there's got to be, and I'm wondering whether you've actually given much thought or done any work on where is the sweet spot where increased resilience is more cost effective than disaster recovery. Because at the moment, it seems though disaster recovery funded through pass-through seems to be a bit more cost effective than overbuilding a network. But is there a sweet spot that you're seeing, and not wanting to get into gold plating Mark 2.0, but is that something that you're looking at?
Well, Andrew, we're clearly aware there is a sweet spot. We Essential Energy and we, the industry, have a lot more work to do to understand where it is. And if someone can provide us with accurate climate modelling going forward, then that would help enormously. That's clearly not going to be the case. And the other comment I would make in response to that is that resilience, investment in resilience is a choice. Disaster recovery is not. We clearly need to recover from disasters, and the costs there are very hard to mitigate. And so, as regrettable as it is, and you know, as regrettable as our cost pass-through application in respect of the bushfires is, there wasn't a choice. And I think I'm very proud of the work we did do in terms of, as I say, nuancing some of the network rebuild and going to SAPs, but nevertheless, the cost incurred was very significant.
Yeah, I think, and as you can and will replace a wooden network that's prone to burn down because it's made out of wood with something that's a little bit more fire retardant, I think is the right way to go.
Yep, absolutely.
We've discussed some very weighty issues today, and we could continue, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So thank you again for your disclosure and for this very helpful discussion. And so we will, as you know, publish our report in December, and then meet with you and the other CEOs after that to see where we've got to. So thank you very much for today, all of you.
And thank you, Claire, Cassandra and Andrew. We very much appreciate the opportunity and the ongoing work of the Independent Accountability Panel. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.